anyway, here, U.S. officials, this is where we're going to start, and then we're going to get into Lebanon, and then we'll talk more about, like, obviously the internal dynamic here. Before we get the blowback boys on.
Live with BBC News.
Before we get to that though, here. So obviously Israel did an attack of terror on Lebanese soil. They exploded booby-trapped civilian communications devices. The Western media covered it as though it was a profound, incredible feat of impressive espionage. Leon Panetta, the former CIA director, was like, nah, it's terrorism. UN human rights advocates said, nah, it's terrorism. It's a war crime. This is a war crime. And it's actually opening up the door to like severe problems for everyone else. Okay? But hey, Israel got that. You know what I mean? John Fetterman's on board. Americans that love only reading the news and never really exercising a single shred of critical thinking, they loved it. So who cares what other people think? Reddit liked it, so it's not an act of terror. Also, here's the U.S. State Department.
The story from last week. Is it the Pentagon's view that it's acceptable under the laws of war to booby-trap civilian objects and place them amongst civilian populations? Is that acceptable for any nation to do?
That's something that, without commenting on an operation that the U.S. military had no involvement in, it's hard for me to get into the hypotheticals. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to try and go down and explain.
Because if you were a lawyer, you would say, of course it's not acceptable. It is a war crime. Okay? It's a war crime. It's simple. Okay? You're not a lawyer. Let's refer to the lawyers. Okay, lawyers said it's a war crime. Moving on. And also, you don't, the reason why people have to find hypotheticals in a situation that actually happened, I can't stress this enough. This is a real thing that already occurred. Israel did it, okay, in Lebanon. The reason why we have to resort to hypotheticals is because when Israel does it, you say it's okay. So what if someone else did it to us or to Israel or to our European allies? People that we do think are human beings. What if someone did that? Well, in that circumstance, I think you would all understand. If Russia did it, you'd be like, war crime alert, war crime alert. They're at it again.
Legalese from here. So I just can't comment further on that operation. Yeah.
U.S., though, affecting supply chains or intercepting supply chains in order to place explosive items within normal consumer objects, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on a hypothetical or an operation that we had no part of. Yeah.
Follow up the story.
Yeah. Anyway, the deadly pager operation in Lebanon was like the first strike. And then they went back to, doing Israel shit, famous Israel shit, which is carpet bombing villages, carpet bombing towns, and putting out shitty CGI to be like, this is why we're going to carpet bomb your villages. Now, they're not doing it to a territory that they are the belligerent occupier of, but which is already illegal, and they don't have a right to defend themselves in that way. But now they're also doing it to a whole-ass, sovereign-ass nation, the nation of Lebanon. This is not Gaza anymore, but if you were to look at the media and the way that they're covering it, you might have thought, oh, it is the Gaza. This is Gaza 2.0. Hezbollah is Hamas. We went from Hamas to Hezbollah. Let's take a look at how BBC is covering the Israeli army chief telling troops Lebanon strikes are preparing ground for attack.
I'm Anna Foster here in Beirut as fears continue to grow.
Can you let me know what the argument is for Lebanon self-defense when the uninitiated people tell Lebanon is the one who started this retaliation support for Gaza? The Hezbollah initiatives in southern Lebanon and in northern Israel have been a constant tit for tat, okay? Pre-October 7 and certainly post-October 7. And even in that tit for tat, Israel is responsible for 70 or 80% of the munitions being deployed. Israel is responsible for 80% of all rockets fired in the back and forth tit for tat. Okay? Israel has shown every regional actor, everyone that has eyes to see, that has a brain cell to understand these issues, that they will never back down if you ask them gently. Okay? This is after 78 years of brutal occupation and the maintenance of an apartheid. So, of course, regional actors are like, okay, well, we are going to make this as costly as possible for you. We know you have an Iron Dome. We know that you'll be able to intercept most of these missiles, but they're very costly. Okay? They're very costly for you. It's costly for you to have 20,000 civilians evacuate the northern territories that you are currently occupying. It's going to be costly for you to use Tamir interceptor missiles. Okay? It's a game of math at that point. And now the Iron Dome has started not working. When that starts occurring and missiles start hitting Tel Aviv, for example, when that happens, then inevitably more and more people are going to leave Israel. They are no longer going to feel safe in Israel. They're going to want to leave Israel and go to America or Western nations or any other country for that matter. This presents a genuine threat to the Zionist project of establishing a Jewish ethno-state in the area, okay? If you no longer can be the startup nation, if you no longer can be the nation that is beautiful, that made the desert bloom, all of a sudden, people are going to be, you're not going to have academics, okay? You're not going to have artists, which you didn't really have a lot to begin with. Holy fuck. The Jews are God's people, you dumb fucks. I unbanned this person specifically because I wanted to let him chirp. Okay? GG, Jewish people are God's people. God will defend his people. Jesus will come back, and when he does, ? Holy. Fuck Hamas. This dude needs to crawl back under his rock and die. God has Israel's back. Nuff said. Fuck that. Beetlejuice banned him. I unbanned him because I knew he was going to come out with some incredible stuff. He said, the Jews are God's people, dumb fucks. Love that. Thank you. Is it a hardware issue? Is the dome bugged? Is it outdated? How is the dome failing exactly? I mean, what do you mean, how is the dome failing? It's being overwhelmed. There is at the end of the day, there is a finite amount of missiles that you can utilize. The Iron Dome is not actually a dome. Okay? The Iron Dome is a surface-to-air missile system. Okay? Which means you're launching missiles at the missiles that are coming in. Oftentimes, 2 at a time, as a matter of fact. Anyway, let's get
A further escalation in the conflict here in the Middle East. We've heard just in the last hour the chief of Israel's defense forces speaking to soldiers on the northern border, telling them to prepare for a ground invasion into southern Lebanon. And we also heard the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer talking about that and other world conflicts and crises at the UN in New York. Of course, countries from around the world meeting for the General Assembly. And our Sumi Somaskanda is there and has been following developments over the last few days. And Sumi, when you hear the calls there for de-escalation,
I think having Israel set up troops for a ground invasion of a whole ass sovereign nation after 12 months of conducting its genocidal campaign in a territory that it illegally occupies and opening up a new front with America's backing, while simultaneously the UN is just like, listening to Joe Biden talk about how, I did NATO. Like, what a beautiful juxtaposition right here, What a perfect demonstration of how feckless and how powerless these institutions are and how little they are actually doing their primary duty, which is not to necessarily uphold international law and rules, right? But more so to, at the very least, present it as though there is some semblance of international rule-based order. They're failing on the PR front. just like the American peer failed on the PR front. That is what this is. The primary function of the UN is to at least make it seem as though Western nations are interested in international collaboration and uphold a certain set of standards. Okay? But they're not doing that. They're even failing on the PR front.
But here in the Middle East, the messages, the sounds, the noise and the fury is very different. Are they expecting at the UN General Assembly to have an impact on what's happening here?
Anna, that really is the most striking difference that I'm seeing right now. These tones of escalation that you're witnessing on the ground there in Lebanon, so different to these calls for de-escalation, for a ceasefire, as we've now heard from the British Prime Minister. And there's
the Iron Dome has never been tested and was largely sold on marketing and is a farce. I'll be shocked if Israel is willing to put it on to the test in fear of exposing the emperor as having no clothes. What are you talking about? The Iron Dome absolutely gets tested. It's just only been tested on fucking like bathtub rockets and shit, and also the Hezbollah rockets that are not bathtub rockets, but it definitely has been tested. There are statistics for its level of success in Israel. The reason why Israel does not let anyone else have the Iron Dome is specifically because they're worried that if Ukraine, for example, got the Iron Dome, well, two reasons. One, because Israel and Russia have obvious partnerships and have consistently maintained like decent relationships, regardless of what Vladimir Putin says or regardless of what Benjamin Netanyahu says. That's one aspect of this conversation. The other aspect of this conversation is that Benjamin Netanyahu refused Ukraine getting an Iron Dome, and the reason why they didn't want to give Ukraine an Iron Dome is because they were worried that if Russia were to overtake and overwhelm Ukraine, or at least this was their outward reasoning, that Russia would have access to the Iron Dome and would give it to Iran. And the reality is, ultimately, Iron Dome is a phenomenal piece of tech. Okay, it is. It has done a really good job of thwarting attacks from Hamas and Hezbollah and anyone else for that matter, except now it is actually being penetrated. And not only is it being penetrated by like loiter munitions, it's being penetrated by obviously hypersonic missiles, which the Houthis apparently have, which is crazy. Obviously, nothing is impossible to penetrate when you have, when you have enough of a will. This is a similar situation to Republicans wanting to invade Mexico to fight the cartels. Stop saying penetrate. How about you penetrate the top of the hour ad break by subscribing, okay?
certainly is an optimism because you do have world leaders gathered here.
That's right. 3-minute ad break is upon us. 420. Blaze it for September or for free with the Twitch Prime to avoid it. Or you can get gifted to subbers a 3-minute ad break now. Mate Feed Art, thank you for the 10 gifted subs. Allowing 10 people to also no longer see the ads at the top of the hour. IDF boasted an interception rate above 85%. Yeah.
Here, the sense that President Biden, the British Prime Minister, of course, Sir Keir Starmer, and world leaders gathered here are the ones who, at least on the sidelines of the summit, could possibly move forward some diplomatic action. You know, we talked to the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations yesterday, and we saw him again today, and we know that there is this United Nations Security Council meeting taking place this afternoon, particularly on the conflict, on the escalating situation in Lebanon. Remember, it was France that called for this meeting. Well, the Israeli ambassador told us he will be going to that UN Security Council meeting, and he had told us that he wants to make sure that they understand that the aggressor here is Iran. So, of course, they are thinking about civilians, he told me, as the rest of the world is, as we are seeing these calls for a ceasefire, and that is important to the Israelis. But they want it to be clear at this UN Security Council meeting that Iran and Hezbollah are the aggressors.
I'm from Lebanon, and I know friends whose homes and villages have been bombed, and guess what? There were no missiles there. How does the world fall for the human shield lie? They're just justifying murdering civilians. The 3D renders look like obvious bullshit. My friend, if you're Lebanese, you already know this reality, but like, they just don't think you're a human being. That's it. It's the sad state of affairs, but it is what it is. In the Western world, people do not think you're a real human being whose life is worth anything. I hate to say it, but it is true. If you are Muslim, if you are Arab, if you happen to live in a country that has Muslims or Arabs as a significant percentage of its population, if you're a country that is in the crosshairs of Israel or America, your lives are not worthy. Okay? There are certain Muslim vassal states that also take priority over others. Saudi Arabia, UAE. These are countries, especially Gulf nations, that also obviously get to, as long as they're like killing, other enemies of America, enemies of the state, they get to do whatever they want to as well. Or sometimes maybe you can use an attack from a certain country's nationals as a justification for invading the Middle East. Then it's also fine. 9/11, Saudi Arabia. There's just no amount of cruelty and evil that the American state will not abide by as long as it subscribes to their material interests, their material needs, as long as it fucking creates a just cause for additional weapons contracts and death and destruction of the third world, extraction of natural resources from places like Iraq, for example. They will always abide by it. They don't give a shit.
Here. It would be very interesting to see what might come out of that, Anna, because as you said, the situation is heating up on the ground with this possibility of a ground and
yeah, the entire system. Iron Dome is the name for the short range and very precise part of the Israeli air defense system. The whole system includes Yahalom and David String. You have Arrow 1, Arrow 2 as well. Iron Dome is great for short range defense for a very particular direction, meaning against Hamas rockets from Gaza. Otherwise, David Sling is the main long range system. Yes. But the entirety of the Israeli surface-to-air counter missile system has failed. It has failed since October 7. And that presents a unique problem for Israel. Israel must maintain this veneer of security so that it can continue presenting itself as like a Western adjacent nation in the middle of the Middle East. If it cannot do that, then it's not going to have artists and academics travel to Israel, okay? It also has to maintain itself as a moral nation, an important democracy, despite the fact that it's obviously not, considering that it is a fucking apartheid state doing a genocide. There's just, they will become a social pariah. They have become a social pariah. More and more people will be like, I'm never going to go to Israel. And that is also going to create more pressure. This is how apartheid South Africa perished. Okay? Yeah, when you lose Radiohead, that's when you're completely gone,
incursion. Everyone we've been speaking to here, including the Swedish foreign minister who I just spoke to, she said, we are speaking to all of our allies to underline the point that we must find a diplomatic solution so that civilians in Lebanon can return to their homes as well as in Israel. But at the moment, as things are so hot on the ground, it looks like a very steep hill to climb, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as you've been reflecting yourself, Sumi, on BBC News over the last couple of days as well, not just the Middle East that's on the table there. We heard, of course, President Zelensky speaking earlier as well. There are other crises, other conflicts that need the world's attention too.
Absolutely. So President Zelensky delivering his address to the UN.
I've seen more impacts in Israel in the last 2 days than the entire last year. Like dozens and dozens of sites have been hit, but the media ignores it, which surprises me because it plays into the whole victim complex thing. No. The media has ignored the Ansar Allah missile striking at Tel Aviv as well. There's a very important reason for that. That is because if Israeli society no longer feels comfortable inside of the boundaries of Israel, they will change their attitude towards how Israel presents itself as a consistent aggressor against all of its enemies that are worthy of death and destruction. You cannot disrupt the veneer of security. This is why October 7 was so significant. Okay? Because October 7 is a military operation from a bunch of ascetic resistance groups that were able to pull it together was a genuinely like psyche breaking moment for Israeli society. IDF's Arabic spokesman releases a video mocking refugees from southern Lebanon, showing him watching videos of them fleeing on his phone, calls them ignorant of Hezbollah's true nature, and says they are now crawling towards an unknown fate. The media ignores it because all you seek is Western information. Israel will never be a pariah state as long as the UK and US continues to glaze them. That's not true. Israel already has become a pariah state, and Israel was a pariah state in the third world already. But it's especially now becoming a pariah state in the Western hemisphere, which is far more consequential. When people start going, you're from Israel? That's weird. It's over, okay? The project has completely collapsed. Do you understand? Doesn't matter how hard fucking the US and the UK glaze it. Doesn't matter how hard fucking mainstream media tries to present this image. I'm telling you right now, when someone goes, I don't know about that, the moment that normies go, wait, you're from Israel? But they're doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff, aren't they? The moment that that happens, you have become officially a fucking pariah state, okay? This is exactly what happened with apartheid South Africa. There is no way out of that situation. And what Israel has done is basically use this as the last opportunity they have to do as much land grabs as possible, as many land grabs as possible. And that is only worsening the standing that Israel has in Western society, which is very important. Okay? Like, you can't, this is anti-Semitism, your way out of that problem. You just can't, you can't do that. People don't give a shit. People will literally just directly respond to that by being anti-Semitic, which is the secondary damaging aspect of Israel tying itself so closely to Judaism in a false way to defend itself. Like, people don't give a shit. They're like, all right, well, I saw blown up people. I don't give a fuck. Okay. Yeah, okay. I'm anti-Semitic then. It will be the response and has been the response, as a matter of fact. This makes it doubly awful. When I think of Israel now, I think of the IDF soldiers on their days off wearing those acid-washed denim capris, and they all have creeping PTSD from the slaughter they have done. At the loudest David Guetta music cannot drown it out at night. Like, as long as Israel continues its bloody conquest, it's not going to go away. Like, people are still going to be further and further more grossed out by it. And you can't, like, hide the truth. You can't hide the truth by just being like, yeah, it's now illegal to be mean to Israel, okay? Which is precisely what American college campuses are trying to do right now. It's precisely what Dana Nessel did in Michigan. It's what Cornell is doing with the PhD grad student that they're literally deporting from the country, the Muslim grad student. Yeah, like, you getting called anti-Semite of the week, all you could do was throw your hands up and say, fine, I'm anti-Semitic then. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And, like, that would have worked as a very successful way to separate who I am and my commentary from those who want to hear it, okay? 5 years ago, that would have been genuinely a successful message, okay? In terms of, like, immediately stopping someone and chastising them dead in their fucking tracks. It worked against Jeremy Corbyn, okay? 5 years into the future, when everyone understands, like, organizations like StopAntisemitism.org that get, like, grants from the Israeli Knesset, by the way, to operate in this way in the United States of America, nobody gives a shit. Nobody gives a shit. Like, it's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous to be like, wow, you're really anti-Semitic for saying that Israel's an apartheid state, which is what the Human Rights Watch has openly declared. Amnesty International has openly declared. There's like 18 fucking NGOs, including Israeli human rights groups, that have recognized the reality and have openly declared it as such because it is the truth. The ICJ has recognized it. The ICJ a couple months back straight up said Israel is currently unjustifiably occupying Palestinian territories and they must immediately remove themselves from both the West Bank and Gaza. You don't talk about it, you don't cover it in the Western news, but that is the reality. And when that is the reality, someone like myself now will get hit with cynical anti-Semitism allegations, but I could just turn around and point to those things that people do care about, that people do still believe, that still have a shred of credibility, especially amongst normies. It's just, it's ridiculous. And even people that don't know, even people that aren't aware of these institutions, these NGOs or whatever, they still see like blown up babies and go, oh, that's a little gross. Maybe that's a bridge too far.
Earlier today, that got, of course, plenty of attention. He spoke specifically about what he said was a renewed Russian threat on nuclear facilities in Ukraine. And his point there was really to reach out to delegates here at the United Nations to say this is not a conflict that just affects Ukraine and my country, but rather could soon be something that is brought to the rest of Europe and to the rest of the world as well. And he specifically pointed to the global south, to Brazil, to China, and said that any alternate peace plans that are presented should not be heeded because any peace plan must be a just peace that goes through Ukraine. So certainly that has been a big topic of conversation here today. We know that President Zelensky is headed to the White House on Thursday to present his plan for victory to President Biden there, and we'll see what developments happen there. But I have to say, Anna, certainly the escalation in Lebanon is the topic that is dominating the agenda. Again, we'll be following that UN Security Council meeting taking place a little bit later today.
Our chief foreign correspondent, Ian.
Thousands flee as Israel warns of more strikes against Hezbollah. Interesting.